Roman numeral 5, a lack of watchfulness against the insinuation of national vices and the prevailing sins of any present age, has effectually promoted an apostasy from evangelical holiness among the generality of Christians. There are some vices, crimes, or sins that particular nations, on what grounds I shall not now inquire, are peculiarly inclined to, which therefore abound in them, for it is evident what great advantages those vices must have on the minds of men, and how easy it is to have their practice imposed on them. All men are continually encompassed with them in their occasions, and commonness takes off the sense of their guilt. That which would be looked on in one nation as the greatest debauchery of human nature is through custom in another nation passed by without any criticism. As a result, the prevalency of the gospel in any nation may be measured by the excess it has against known national sins, if these are not in some good measure subdued by it, if the minds of men be not alienated from them and made watchful against them, if their guilt appear not naked, without the varnish or veil put upon it by commonness or custom. Whatever profession is made of the gospel, it is vain and useless. So the apostle allows that there were national sins prevalent among the Cretans, Titus 1, verses 12 to 13. One of themselves, a prophet of their own, said, "The Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith." Whatever their profession was, if they were not delivered by the gospel from the power and practice of these national sins which they were so prone to, they would not long be sound in the faith, nor fruitful in obedience. So among the Jews there was a peculiar kind of stubbornness and obstinacy above any other nation under heaven, which God complains of in their successive generations from the first to the last, and which continues to be their characteristical evil to this day. So Josiah was eminently commended because his heart was tender. 2 Chronicles 34, verse 27, he was not under the power of the common sin of that people, which indeed includes all other evils whatever. It was a rare thing to find one of a tender heart among them, and we may observe that the great apostasy which is at this day among the nations which have received the Christian religion consists in a degeneracy into those customs, manners, humors, and courses of conversation which were common among them, and national before the entrance of Christianity, set aside in outward profession and formality of worship, and the generality of men in most nations live as they did formerly, and are given up greatly to those vices which were prevalent among them in their heathenism. A full evidence this is that the power of evangelical truth has lost among them, the efficacy of it consisting in curing the vices of nature and those evils which men have been most habituated to, as the prophet at large declares in Isaiah 11, verses 6 to 9. So the sin of this nation has been always esteemed sensuality of life, in an excess of eating and drinking, with the consequences of it. As of late have been added vanity in apparel, with foolish, light, lascivious modes and dressings therein, and an immodest boldness in conversation among men and women. These are corruptions which, being borrowed from the neighbor nation and grafted on crab stalks of our own, have brought forth the fruit of vanity and pride and abundance. And it is the most manifest evidence of a degenerate people, when they are prone to naturalize the vices of other nations among them, but don't care to imitate their virtues, if in any kind they excel. But thus, the lust of the eyes and the pride of life are joined to the lust of the flesh to give the world, as opposite to God, a complete interest among us. It may be the things are restrained in some by contrary vices, as covetousness, and an earnest desire or ambition to enrich a family and leave a name amongst men, a vanity infused amongst mankind from the great design of the builders of Babel, which was to make to themselves a name, Genesis 11, verse 4. This is but another way of the exercise of the same sin. Now, where sins are thus national and common, it is easier for men to preserve themselves from the most raging epidemical disease. than from being in one degree or other tainted with the infection of them. It is almost inexpressible how efficaciously they will insinuate themselves into the minds and lives of men. They are so beset on every side with the occasions of them and temptations to do them. They offer themselves continually with so many specious pretenses as that there is no security against them but being encompassed with the whole armor of God, a matter that few understand or apply themselves to. But it is not possible on any other grounds, or by any other means, for single persons to hold out and prevail against the national confederacy in sin. For they who will not say, a confederacy, to them, or in those things in which a whole people shall say a confederacy, must be content to be for signs and wonders, to be despised and even hooted at. Isaiah 8, verse 11, 12, and 18. However, it is apparent that by them the general apostasy we treat of is visibly and openly promoted. Some are engaged in them by a corrupt course of education, and some are betrayed into the entrances of them by sloth, negligence, and security. Some lose a sense of their guilt by their commonness. Some yield to the arguments that are pleaded, if not in their justification, yet in their excuse for their extenuation, one way or another. Multitudes of all sorts are by them turned away from gospel obedience. So it has come to pass that Christianity is, as to customs, manners, vanities, vices, and way of conversation, sunk down into heathenism. Her prevalent national sins have drowned the power and left little but the outward form of it in the world. And where it is so, the life, substance, and all the real benefits of the gospel are renounced, for it does not design only to turn men in their outward profession from dumb idols to serve the living God, to change the form and outward state of religion, as the missionaries of the Catholic Church have made conversions of the Indians, giving them new images instead of their old idols, and new saints for their former themes. But to turn men also from all ungodliness and worldly lust, to live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. Where this is not effected, either the gospel never really prevailed among men, or they are fallen away from it. And where men engage into a profession of religion, disallowing and condemning such national vanities, vices, and customs, if they are publicly countenanced, they occasion particular apostasies every day. This is that which, on the one side and the other, has almost lost a Protestant religion in some neighbor nations, for not being able to hold out against those national vanities and vices which are publicly countenanced. They find no relief to their minds but in a renunciation of that religion by which they are condemned. And this I look upon as the principal means of that general defection from evangelical holiness which prevails in most nations. The gospel comes upon a nation. It's on a wilderness or forest that is full of such wood, thorns, and briars, as the soul of itself is peculiarly disposed to produce. These it cuts down to the ground, planting good and noble plants in their room, in which the barren wilderness becomes for a season a fruitful field. But in the process of time, if continual care and culture be not used about it, the earth pours out of its own accord the weeds and briars which are natural to it. These, springing up abundantly, choke the other plants and useful herbs, in which the fruitful field is turned again into a wilderness. There needs no more to this apostasy, but that national vices, for a time suppressed by the power of the word, should overgrow the generality of any people, in which the graces of the gospel will be certainly stifled and choked. Roman numeral 6. Mistakes about the beauty and glory of the Christian religion have been no small cause of apostasy from its power and holiness. That it should have a glory, somewhat that might render it honorable in the eyes and esteem of men, was always thought unquestionable. And it is certainly true, provided that we suppose those with whom we have to do have eyes to see that glory, and spiritual minds enlightened to make a true judgment of it. In compliance with this was religion outwardly figured and represented among the Jews. And as the apostle declares that the worship of God and the administration of the gospel is truly glorious, and eminently so above what was to be found in the administration of the law. So Christian religion is in itself truly honorable and contains in it everything that is so in the judgment of God and the rectified reason of mankind. But about the true notion and apprehension of that glory and honor which is proper to religion and suited to its nature, men have fallen into many woeful mistakes. For, whereas it principally consists in the glorious internal operations of the Holy Spirit, renewing our nature, transforming us into the image and likeness of God with the fruits of His grace and righteousness and true holiness, in a meek, humble, gracious conversation, and the performance of all duties according to the rule, few are able to discern beauty or glory or honor in these things. But yet, where there is not an eye to discern them, the gospel must of necessity be despised and abandoned, and something else substituted in the room of it. This, therefore, also proved a great furtherance of the general apostasy, and continues an efficacious means of keeping multitudes under the power of it to this day. For, first, through the loss of spiritual light and neglect of the grace of God, things were come to that pass in the world that those who had the conduct of religion saw no real glory themselves in the things in which all the glory of the religion taught and appointed in the gospel consists. And there are but few that do so at this day. Therefore the profession that is made of them by any is generally looked on as hypocrisy, mixed with a certain kind of superstition, and it is accordingly despised. Yea, nothing is more contemptible in the world than the possession and profession of those which are truly, if not only noble. Their view, therefore, being lost in the eyes of the leaders of the church, it could not but be expected that they should be instrumental to open the eyes of others, or careful to instruct them how to look after what themselves did not discern. Number 2. Roman numeral 7. During these seasons, Satan, as he will never be, was not lacking to his own occasions and advantages, and they are altogether ignorant of his devices who don't discern him at work, even at present, to the same end and purpose. Nor is it possible that in any age, time, or place, the glory of the gospel should be abated, and the principal endeavor in it not belong to him. He is the head and leader of every apostasy from God. In this he began his work in this world, and in the promotion of it he will finish it. And as he engaged all his power and art against the head of the church, so by his total defeat in that attempt, in which he made the clearest discovery of his pride and malice against God, that it is possible for him to do, he is not discouraged from pursuing the same design against the whole church itself. And the way now insisted on has been the chiefest path that he has beaten in his course. For from the very entrance of Christianity he began to immix himself with all those lusts of men in which a defection from its power and purity might be set on foot and defected, and he engaged in it in both his capacities as a lion and as a serpent. As a lion he stirred up, acted, and animated all those bloody persecutions in which the Jews and pagan world attempted for 300 years to exterminate the Christian profession. But in this his success was answerable to that of his attempt against the head of the church, and ever will be so by virtue of the victory the Lord Christ had over him in the same kind of conflict. The force of the devil in the world having been once fully broken and subdued by Christ, it shall never prevail in the issue against his followers. Satan, in a confederacy with the world, may as a lion through the rage and blood make a great bluster and scatter the churches of Christ for a season. But to prevail to the ruin of the church in this way he never did, nor shall. And if at any time by national devastations he does so far succeed as to expel the gospel from any place or country for a season, it shall be evident to all that it shall turn greatly to its advantage in general, and in other places. Let not then any fear of its bloody fury as to the interest of Christ and the gospel in the world. As sure as he was conquered and triumphed over in the cross of Christ, he shall finally be so in all such attempts. Happy and blessed are they, and shall they be, by whose blood and temporal ruin his power at any time is or shall be broken. So I say it fell out in its first attempt in this way against the Christian religion. For through the efficacy of the grace of Christ, and by virtue of the victory obtained against him in his own person, he was overcome by the blood and constancy of innumerable holy souls, until he was cast out of the havens of the world, and an end was put to his rage. But in the meantime, while this sworn enemy of the church made all this bluster as a lion, and raised all these storms of persecution, which the minds of all the professors of Christianity were intent upon, and generally much fortified against, he was secretly at work as a serpent also, and as he secretly and gradually infected the minds of many with ambition, worldliness, superstition, and a neglect of the power and simplicity of the gospel, that this work is his work as a serpent, our apostle declares in 2 Corinthians 11:2 and 3, and in this sometimes he transformed himself into an angel of light, as he speaks in that place, verses 14 and 15, for he not only poisoned and inflamed the lusts of men, but drew them aside from the gospel by suggestions and pretenses of more piety and devotion, or at least of other outward modes and means of their expression than it required. So did the mystery of iniquity work in the days of the apostles themselves, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 7. He was at work secretly by ways and means not easy to be discovered to draw off the minds of men from evangelical truth and holiness, by sowing the seeds of that ambition and superstition which afterwards spread themselves over the face of the whole visible church. So was he the spirit which animated the apostasy which by various and insensible degrees prevailed in the following ages. Those who acted in it and promoted it never knew anything of the design, but added one thing to another as occasion was offered, which gave it increase. But in him the projection was designed and regularly carried on from the beginning. So had it the name of the mystery of iniquity as being insinuated and promoted by such unsearchable methods or depths of Satan that those, for the most part, who were subservient to his design knew not what they did, though sufficiently warned in the Bible of what he would do and what should come to pass. Therefore, being disappointed, as was said, in his endeavors by outward force and persecution, as he will ever be, leaving the name, power, and advantage of the church to them that professed Christianity, he made use of all the darkness, ignorance, errors, ambition, and lusts of men, gradually to draw them from the truth and holiness of the gospel. And he did not cease until he had brought the Christian religion to be looked on as made up principally, if not only, of those things which by his craft and the lusts of men were introduced into it. So he pursued his work, almost undiscovered, until the generality of those who professed the Christian religion were given up to the power of their sensual lust on the one hand, or brought under the power of superstition on the other. All this he attempted and in a great measure effected of its own accord. But after that men had voluntarily given up themselves to his delusions, rejecting the truth and holiness of the gospel, as to their love to them and delight in them, God in his righteous judgment gave them up to his power, to be infatuated by him and hardened to their eternal ruin. So the apostle expresses it in 2 Thessalonians 2, 11 and 12. For this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Thus the apostasy completed under the papacy, and by the same artifices is Satan still at work among us to the same ends and purposes. Roman numeral 8. Moreover, among the occasions of the present decay of holiness and the power of Christianity in the world, we may reckon the scandal that has been given by, or is justly taken at those who have professed the most strict obedience to the rules of the gospel. There is nothing difficult in this, but only to choose out the most pregnant examples, and the multitudes which offer themselves to evidence this occasion. Nor do I intend such offenses as some men will enviously seek after, and sometimes causelessly create, but such as are really given and offer themselves to the consideration of all sorts of men. Of these I shall mention only two, which are the most obvious and extensive. Is number 1. People are offended at the divisions that have been among them, and continue to be so with the management of them in an evil, contentious frame of spirit. The Lord Jesus Christ has declared and appointed that the mutual love of his disciples should be the great testimony of the truth of his doctrine and the sincerity of their obedience. He has also commanded them to be one in heart, mind, and affection, praying for them also, that so they might be. His commands and directions to this purpose are known to all who know the gospel, and so do not need here to be repeated or insisted on. The blessed effects and fruits of them were eminent for a season among the professors of the gospel, and their mutual love was a convincing argument of the truth, efficacy, and holiness of the doctrine which they profess. For where there is oneness and love thereon, there is peace, order, usefulness to mankind, and every good work, in which the lack of these things is attended with strife, envy, confusion, disorder, and every evil work whatever. Some divisions indeed happened among the primitive Christians, but were quickly healed by the spirit of apostolic authority and that love which was yet prevalent among them. But afterward all things grew worse, and the first visible degeneracy of Christianity consisted in the strifes, divisions, and contentions of its professors, especially of their spiritual leaders. And these, in no long process of time, proceeded to that excess, and were acted with such an evil spirit of pride, ambition, envy, and malice, that the very heathen made themselves sport with their contentions, and observed that there were no sort of men in the world so ready for them and implacable in them as the Christians of those days were. But when once one party or other of them got into power, and snatching that sort of force and violence out of the hands of pagans which had been imbrued in the blood of the holy martyrs, they began in the pursuit of their divisions to persecute one or another, which way carnal men have tasted the sweetness and advantage of, is that which, gratifying their envy, malice, and ambition, also does, as they suppose, secure all their earthly concerns. They would not forego, nor have so done until it has become the touchstone of many men's religion. It was merely from the unspeakable care and mercy of God that they did not make the gospel an abhorrence to all flesh. For who, not yet endued with that light and grace which might secure him from the power of such temptations, could look on the fierce, devouring, bloody contentions of its professors, and that solely on its own account, and not suppose that itself proceeded from a spirit of malice, strife, and disorder? But the truth and faithfulness of God preserved it against all the oppositions of its adversaries, and in the midst of the treacheries of its avowed friends. Thus was it in the primitive times, which, as it was the first considerable stop to the progress of the gospel, so it was one principal cause of corrupting the conversation of many, filling them with a frame of spirit in all things directly opposite to that of the gospel. The differences with their untoward management, which fell out amongst the first reformers, was the chief means that hindered their work from a universal success. Is it much otherwise among the strictest sorts of professors at this day? Do not some aim to do nothing more than multiply and increase divisions, and to delight in nothing more than to live in dispute in the flames of them? There is not the least different apprehension of men's minds about anything in religion, but such persons suppose it is a sufficient ground to quarrel and contend about it forever. By such ways and means scandals are given to the world in its proneness to apostasy, and seeking occasions for it or countenance to it, which is its present posture, for these things are not done in a corner. Men who know nothing of the inward power and virtue of that religion which is in such professors, as it is hoped, seeing and observing those other distempers among them, are really alienated from all the good they profess. And not only so, but do from this justify and approve themselves in their immorality and profaneness, as those which allow them a better condition than such wranglers can afford them. By this means has religion lost much of that awful authority in the world, in which it oftentimes puts a restraint on the minds and consciences of men who were never acted by its power. What are the rules in which we ought to walk under the continuance of these differences? And what are the best means to put an issue to them? I have inquired to a treatise to that purpose, but it must be acknowledged that for the most part, attempts for the rebuking of these distempers, the reconciliation of dissenters, and the uniting of professors have been managed from such principles, and in such a frame of spirit as have heightened and increased, rather than allayed or diminished them, great offenses given to the world by the uselessness of professing Christians, and in that they are not what they ought to be, the common good and blessing of mankind. There is a selfish spirit on many of them, in which contenting themselves with abstinence from known sins and the performance of the religious duties of divine worship, they are of little or no use to others. Some will be kind, benign, helpful, good, in some measure to other men, but yet will and do give unto bounds and limits to their actings in this kind. Their own household and the household of faith, according to that measure which from opinion or prejudice they take of it, they will alone regard. As for love, condescension, benignity, kindness, readiness to help, assist, and relieve all mankind, yea, the worst of men, as they have opportunity, they understand them not. Yea, have many pretenses that are not required of them. But if we are Christians, it is required of us to abound in love toward all men, 1 Thessalonians 3:12, and are doing good to all, being useful to all, exercising loving kindness in the earth towards all, is the principal way in which we may express our sincere obedience to the gospel. One professor that is kind, benign, condescending, charitable, useful, ready to become all things to all men for their good, brings more glory to the gospel than 100 who are looked on as those who live too much to themselves. These few instances have been given of the means and ways in which a general apostasy from the holy precepts of the gospel, as a rule of our obedience, has begun and carried on. Many others of an alike nature might be added to them, but it is to no purpose to insist long on the nature of a disease when we find it to despise all possible remedies. Sovereign grace yet remains, in which this state of things is referred. And this apostasy in its measure and proportion partakes of the guilt of that described in the text, which we made the foundation of this discourse, for in this also is Christ crucified afresh, and put to an open shame. For first, all persons who profess the Christian religion and yet are thus fallen off or alienated from its holiness, do really renounce and forego the commands of Christ and those as enlivened by his promises for the pleasure and wages of sin. And in this do they openly declare and avow as a judgment and resolution of their minds that there is not that excellency in his precepts, nor that goodness, beauty, desirableness, and satisfaction and obedience to them, or not that assurance in his promises or worth in the things promised, as that they ought to be preferred before the course of this world and the pleasures of sin. Hence some commands of the gospel, and those of no small importance to the furtherance of holy obedience, are neglected and cast from among the generality of Christians. Such are the commands for mutual love, in which there is scarce any shadow left in the world, for that pretense of it which some seem to rest in and plead for as satisfactory in a peaceable and, as they say, loving converse of persons in their civil and ecclesiastical distributions, is no other than what is found among the Mohammedans and pagans on the like occasion, which, as it is good and commendable so far as it proceeds from and is suited to the light of nature, so it no way answers, either in the kind of it, or in its acts and fruits, to that evangelical love which the Lord Christ requires among his disciples. That watchfulness over one another with love, care, and tenderness, those mutual admonitions and exhortations and consolations which the gospel so frequently and diligently prescribes to us, are not only neglected, but so far despised that the very naming of such duties is made a matter of scorn, as a pretense of hypocritical preciseness, and no better entertainment of many other of the commands of Christ among the generality of them that are called Christians. So do many on all accounts openly profess in their walkings and conversation that they don't see any cogent reason why they should comply with him and his commands, and it is not easily to be conceived how they can cast a greater dishonor or contempt upon him.